Look around you. We stand together as one people. Our strength is in our unity.
Before the musket ball tore through Tecumseh's chest and silenced the greatest voice our people had ever known, before the dream of a united Indian nation died with him in the mud of the Thames River, before the Confederacy he had built with words and vision and sheer force of will crumbled like a lodge consumed by fire, I heard him speak, and his words changed me, transformed me, made me believe that we could stand together, that we could push back the tide of white settlement that was drowning us, that we could reclaim our lands and our dignity and our future. My name is Peshewa, which means wildcat, and I am Shawnee, born in the year the whites called 1792, in a village on the Mad River in the Ohio country, a land that had been ours since the beginning of time, but that was being taken from us piece by piece, treaty by treaty, lie by lie. I was 19 winters old when I first heard Tecumseh speak, when I first understood that there was an alternative to the slow death we were dying, the gradual disappearance of our people through disease and alcohol and the loss of our hunting grounds, the steady erosion of everything that made us who we were. That day, that moment when I heard his voice rising above the crowd like the cry of an eagle, like thunder rolling across the sky, that was the day I became truly alive, the day I found my purpose, the day I joined a movement that would shake the foundations of the American Republic and come so close, so heartbreakingly close, to changing the course of history. I remember every word he said that day, every gesture, every pause, every moment of that speech, because it was burned into my soul like a brand, like a vision that would guide me for the rest of my life. He stood on a raised platform in the center of our village, tall and straight, his body lean and muscular, his face strong and handsome, his eyes blazing with an intensity that seemed to look into your very spirit, and he spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the gathering, a voice that was both gentle and powerful, both reasoned and passionate, a voice that commanded attention and respect and belief. There must have been 300 people gathered there that spring morning, warriors and chiefs and elders and women and children, people from our own village and people who had traveled from other Shawnee villages and even from other tribes, Delaware and Miami and Wyandotte, all of them drawn by the rumors of this man who was saying things that no one else dared to say, who was challenging the accepted wisdom that we must accommodate the whites, that we must accept their treaties, that we must move west and make room for their settlements. He said, "Brothers, we are Shawnee, we are Delaware, we are Miami, we are Wyandotte, we are Potawatomi, we are Kickapoo, we are Ottawa, we are Ojibwa, we are Winnebago, we are Sauk, we are Fox, we are Creek, we are Cherokee, we are Chickasaw, we are Choctaw, we are Seminole. We are 100 different names, 100 different languages, 100 different ways of living, but we are all one people. We are all children of the same Creator. We are all inhabitants of the same land, and we all face the same enemy, the same threat, the same destruction. The whites call us savages, they call us heathens, they call us obstacles to progress, but what they really mean is that we are in the way, that we occupy land they want, that we represent a way of life that challenges their assumptions, that threatens their expansion, that refuses to disappear quietly and conveniently. They have taken our lands through treaties that we did not understand, that were signed by chiefs who had no authority to sell what belonged to all of us, that were written in a language we could not read and enforced by laws we did not make. They have divided us, turned us against each other, made us fight their wars, made us believe that our survival depends on cooperation with them, on adoption of their ways, on abandonment of our own cultures and identities. And where has this cooperation led us? Where has this accommodation brought us? We are fewer than we were, we are weaker than we were, we are poorer than we were, we are more dependent than we were. And still they want more. Still they push us further. Still they take and take and take until there will be nothing left. Until we will be nothing but a memory, a footnote in their history books, a people who once existed but who were too weak, too divided, too foolish to survive. He paused and the silence was absolute. Hundreds of warriors and chiefs and elders and women hanging on his every word. And I could feel the tension in the air, the sense that something important was happening, that this was a moment that would be remembered, that would change things. I looked around at the faces of the people near me, and I saw the same expression on all of them, a mixture of recognition and anger and hope, as if Tecumseh was giving voice to thoughts they had all had, but had never dared to speak aloud, as if he was articulating a truth that everyone knew, but that no one had been willing to acknowledge. Then he continued, his voice rising, his passion building, his words flowing like a river in flood, unstoppable, overwhelming, carrying everything before it. But it does not have to be this way. We are not weak, we are strong. We are not divided, we can be united. We are not foolish, we can be wise. The Creator gave us this land, all of it, from the great waters in the east to the great waters in the west. From the frozen lands in the north to the warm lands in the south, all of it was ours. All of it was given to us to share, to use, to care for. And no one tribe, no one chief, no one man has the right to sell it, because it belongs to all of us. It belongs to our children and our children's children. It belongs to the generations yet unborn. And we have no right to give it away, no right to surrender it, no right to allow it to be taken from us without a fight. I have traveled among many tribes. I have spoken to many chiefs. I have seen many lands, and everywhere I go I see the same thing. I hear the same story. The whites arrive. They make promises. They sign treaties. They build their cabins and their fences. And then more come and more, and the promises are broken, and the treaties are ignored, and the Indians are pushed further back, further away onto smaller and smaller pieces of land, until there is nowhere left to go, until we are trapped on reservations, dependent on government handouts, our children forgetting the old ways, our languages dying, our cultures disappearing, our very existence as a people coming to an end. I felt a chill run down my spine as he spoke these words, because I knew they were true. I had seen it happening in my own lifetime, in my own village. When I was a child, we had ranged freely across hundreds of miles of territory, hunting and fishing and gathering, following the seasons, living in harmony with the land. But by the time I was a young man, the white settlers had arrived, had built their cabins and their farms, had fenced off the best land, had killed or driven away the game, and we were confined to smaller and smaller areas, dependent on the annuity payments promised in treaties, payments that were always late and always less than promised, payments that came with strings attached, with demands that we change our ways, that we become farmers instead of hunters, that we send our children to their schools to learn their language and their religion and their ways. Tecumseh's voice grew even more powerful, and he raised his arm and pointed to the east, toward the direction from which the white settlers came, and he said, "This is happening to the Shawnee, it is happening to the Delaware, it is happening to the Miami, it is happening to every tribe. And if we do not stop it, if we do not stand together, if we do not draw a line and say, 'No further, you will take no more,' then we are doomed, we are finished, we will be swept away like leaves before a storm, and our grandchildren will curse our memory, will ask why we did not fight, why we did not resist, why we allowed ourselves to be destroyed without raising our hands in our own defense. I have seen what happens to tribes that stand alone, that try to negotiate separately, that believe they can make a deal that will protect them while sacrificing their neighbors. I have seen the Delawares pushed from their lands in Pennsylvania, then from their lands in New Jersey, then from their lands in Ohio, always moving west, always losing more, always promised that this time, this treaty, this reservation will be permanent, and always betrayed, always forced to move again. I have seen the Miamis lose their hunting grounds, their villages destroyed, their people scattered. I have seen the Wyandottes reduced from a proud nation to a handful of refugees living on the charity of others. And I know that this will happen to the Shawnee, it will happen to every tribe, unless we change course, unless we adopt a new strategy, unless we recognize that our only hope is unity, is standing together, is presenting a united front that the Americans cannot divide, cannot conquer, cannot destroy." He lowered his arm, and his voice became quieter, more intimate, as if he was speaking to each person individually, as if he was looking into their hearts and addressing their deepest fears and hopes. "I propose a confederacy, an alliance of all the tribes, united in a common cause, bound together by a common purpose, standing together as one people against the American expansion. I propose that we declare that the land belongs to all of us, that no single tribe can sell it, that any treaty signed without the consent of all the tribes is invalid, is meaningless, is not binding. I propose that we refuse to cede any more land, that we refuse to move any further west, that we establish a boundary and defend it with our lives if necessary. I propose that we put aside our old rivalries, our old grudges, our old conflicts, and recognize that we face a common enemy, an enemy that will destroy us all if we do not stand together. The whites are strong because they are united, because they have one government, one army, one purpose. We are weak because we are divided, because each tribe stands alone, because we fight each other while the real enemy grows stronger. But if we unite, if we stand together, if we present a united front, then we can stop them. We can push them back. We can reclaim what has been taken from us. We can secure a future for our children. We can survive as a people, as a culture, as a way of life. This is not a dream. This is not a fantasy. This is possible. This is achievable. But only if we have the courage to try, only if we have the wisdom to see what must be done, only if we have the strength to do it. The crowd erupted, warriors shouting their approval, raising their weapons, stamping their feet, and I was shouting with them. I was caught up in the moment, in the vision, in the hope that maybe, just maybe, we could do this. We could unite. We could resist. We could win. I looked at the faces around me, and I saw tears streaming down the cheeks of old warriors who had fought in the battles of their youth and who had watched helplessly as their world was destroyed. I saw young men with fire in their eyes, eager to prove themselves, eager to fight for something that mattered, and I saw women nodding in agreement, women who had lost husbands and sons and brothers to the white man's diseases and wars and whiskey, women who wanted a better future for their children. That was in the spring of 1809, and from that day forward, I was Tecumseh's man. I was part of his movement. I was a believer in his vision, and I would follow him anywhere, do anything he asked, give my life if necessary to make his dream a reality. I was not alone. Hundreds of young warriors made the same commitment that day, and in the days and weeks and months that followed, thousands more would join us, drawn by Tecumseh's message, inspired by his vision, willing to risk everything for the chance to save our people, to preserve our way of life, to strike back at the enemy that had taken so much from us. My father, Wapakamita, which means white elk, was a respected warrior and hunter in our village, a man who had fought against the Americans in the wars of the 1790s, who had been at the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794, when the Americans under General Anthony Wayne had defeated a confederacy of tribes and forced them to sign the Treaty of Greenville, a treaty that had taken most of Ohio from us and opened it to white settlement. My father had been wounded in that battle. A musket ball had shattered his left arm, and he carried that injury for the rest of his life, his arm twisted and weak, a constant reminder of the defeat, of the loss, of the futility of fighting the Americans. He had become bitter and cynical, believing that resistance was useless, that the Americans were too strong, too numerous, too determined, and that our only hope was to accommodate them, to accept their terms, to try to preserve what little we had left by cooperating rather than fighting. When I told him that I was joining Tecumseh's movement, that I believed in the Confederacy, that I was willing to fight, he looked at me with sadness and anger, and he said, "You are a fool, my son. You are young and you do not understand. I have fought the Americans. I have seen their power. I have felt their bullets. And I know that we cannot win. Tecumseh is leading you to your death. He is filling your head with dreams that cannot come true. He is giving you false hope that will only make the inevitable defeat more painful. I lost my arm fighting for our land. And what did it accomplish? Nothing. We lost the battle. We lost the war. We lost the land. And all I have to show for it is this useless arm and the knowledge that my sacrifice was meaningless. Do not make the same mistake I made. Do not throw your life away for a lost cause." But I could not accept his words. I could not accept his defeatism. I could not accept that we should simply surrender without a fight. And I said, "Father, I respect you. I honor you. I know that you fought bravely and that you suffered for our people. But I cannot live the way you want me to live. I cannot accept what you have accepted. I cannot watch our world disappear without trying to save it. Tecumseh is right. If we stand together, if we unite all the tribes, we have a chance. We can stop the Americans. We can preserve our lands and our way of life. And even if we fail, even if we are defeated, at least we will have tried, at least we will have fought. At least we will have shown that we are men, that we are warriors, that we will not go quietly into the darkness." My father shook his head and turned away, and he said, "Then go, follow your Tecumseh, fight your war, and when you are lying on the ground with a bullet in your chest, when you are dying far from home, remember that I warned you. Remember that I told you this would happen. And know that I love you, that I am proud of you even though I think you are wrong, and that I will mourn you when you are gone." Those were the last words he spoke to me, because I left the village the next day to go to Prophetstown, and I never saw him again. And I learned years later that he had died during the winter of 1812, of the coughing sickness, and that he had asked for me on his deathbed, had wanted to see me one more time, but I was far away fighting with Tecumseh, and I could not come, and I carry the guilt of that, the knowledge that I chose the cause over my family, that I put Tecumseh's vision above my father's love, and I do not know if that was the right choice, if the cause was worth the sacrifice, but it is the choice I made, and I must live with it. My mother, Nehechma, which means she walks softly, was more understanding, more supportive of my decision, though I know it broke her heart to see me go, to know that I was going to war, that I might not return. She was a woman of great strength and wisdom, a healer and a midwife, respected in the village for her knowledge of plants and medicines, for her ability to ease pain and cure sickness, for her gentle manner and her compassionate heart. On the morning I left, she gave me a medicine bag that she had made, a small leather pouch containing herbs and roots and sacred objects, and she said, "Wear this always, my son. It will protect you. It will keep you safe. It will remind you of who you are and where you come from. I do not know if Tecumseh is right or if your father is right. I do not know if the Confederacy will succeed or if it will fail. But I know that you must follow your heart. You must do what you believe is right, and I will pray for you every day. I will ask the Creator to watch over you, to guide you, to bring you home safely." I had a younger sister, Kihiwa, which means gentle rain, who was 14 winters old, a beautiful girl with long black hair and bright, intelligent eyes, a girl who loved to laugh and sing and dance, a girl who was full of life and joy and hope. She cried when I left. She clung to me and begged me not to go, and I held her and told her that I had to go, that I had to fight for her future, that I wanted her to grow up in a world where she could be free, where she could live according to our ways, where she would not be forced onto a reservation or sent to a white man's school or married to a white settler. I told her that I loved her and that I would come back, though I did not know if that was true, though I knew that many warriors who went to war did not return. And she looked at me with tears streaming down her face, and she said, "Promise me you will come back. Promise me you will not die. Promise me I will see you again." And I promised, though I knew it was a promise I might not be able to keep, and I kissed her forehead and I walked away. And I did not look back, because I knew that if I looked back, if I saw her crying, I would not be able to leave. I would not be able to do what I knew I had to do. Tecumseh was not like other chiefs. He was not interested in personal glory or wealth or power. He was interested only in the survival of his people, all the Indian nations, and he worked tirelessly, traveling thousands of miles, visiting tribe after tribe, speaking to councils, persuading chiefs, building alliances, creating the Confederacy piece by piece, word by word, speech by speech. He was a brilliant orator, perhaps the greatest speaker I have ever heard, able to move men to tears or to rage, able to paint a vision so vivid and compelling that you could see it, could feel it, could believe in it with every fiber of your being. But he was also a man of action, a warrior who had proven himself in battle many times, a leader who commanded respect not just through his words, but through his deeds, through his courage and his integrity, and his unwavering commitment to his principles. I learned his story from the warriors who had known him longer, who had fought beside him in earlier battles, who had watched him grow from a young warrior into a leader of his people. He was born in 1768 in a Shawnee village in Ohio, the son of a war chief who was killed fighting the whites when Tecumseh was still a boy. He grew up during a time of constant warfare, constant displacement, constant loss, watching as his people were driven from their lands, watching as villages were burned and families were scattered, watching as the world he knew was destroyed. He fought in his first battle when he was 15 years old, and he distinguished himself by his courage and his skill. And he continued to fight throughout his youth and young manhood, becoming known as one of the finest warriors of his generation, a man who was brave in battle but also merciful to captives, a man who refused to participate in torture or the killing of prisoners, a man who believed that warfare should be conducted with honor and dignity. But Tecumseh was more than just a warrior. He was a thinker, a philosopher, a visionary who understood that military victories alone would not save his people, that what was needed was a fundamental change in strategy, a new approach to dealing with the American threat. He saw that the Americans were exploiting the divisions among the tribes, signing treaties with individual chiefs, playing one tribe against another, using the classic strategy of divide and conquer. And he understood that the only way to counter this strategy was to unite the tribes, to create a confederacy so large and so powerful that the Americans would have no choice but to negotiate, to recognize Indian rights, to stop their expansion. He was supported in this work by his brother, Tenskwatawa, whom the whites called the Prophet, a man who had been a drunkard and a failure, until he experienced a vision in 1805, a religious awakening that transformed him into a spiritual leader, a holy man who preached a return to the old ways, a rejection of white culture and white goods and white influence, a purification of Indian society, a renewal of traditional values and practices. The Prophet's message was powerful and appealing, especially to those Indians who had been most damaged by contact with white civilization, those who had lost their way, who had become dependent on alcohol and trade goods, who had forgotten the old ceremonies and the old beliefs. The Prophet told them that they could be redeemed, that they could be purified, that they could return to the old ways and regain the favor of the Creator, but only if they rejected everything that came from the whites, only if they gave up alcohol and trade goods and intermarriage, only if they returned to traditional dress and traditional practices and traditional beliefs. The Prophet established a village at the confluence of the Tippecanoe and Wabash rivers in Indiana Territory, a place that became known as Prophetstown, and it became the center of the movement, the capital of the Confederacy, a gathering place for Indians from many tribes who came to hear the Prophet preach and to join Tecumseh's alliance. The location was strategic, situated at the crossroads of several major trails, accessible to tribes from the Great Lakes, from the Ohio Valley, from the Illinois country, from the Mississippi River, a place where warriors could gather, where councils could be held, where the Confederacy could be built and organized and prepared for the coming conflict. I went to Prophetstown in the summer of 1809, and I was amazed by what I saw there. Hundreds of lodges, thousands of people, warriors from a dozen different tribes, all living together in peace, all united in a common cause, all committed to the vision of resistance and renewal. It was like nothing I had ever seen before, a truly multi-tribal community, a living example of what Tecumseh was trying to achieve on a larger scale, proof that Indians from different nations could live and work together, could overcome their differences and their historical animosities, could be one people. I met warriors there from tribes I had only heard of, Kickapoos from Illinois, tall, lean men with faces marked by tattoos, who were known as fierce fighters and expert horsemen. I met Winnebagos from Wisconsin, who spoke a language completely different from ours, who had their own customs and ceremonies, but who shared our anger at the American encroachment, who shared our determination to resist. I met Sauks and Foxes from Iowa, who told stories of how the Americans were pushing into their lands, building forts, establishing trading posts, bringing settlers who cut down the forests and plowed up the prairies. I met Ottawas and Ojibwas from Michigan, who had been allies of the French and then the British, who had fought against the Americans in the Revolutionary War and in the wars that followed, who brought with them a tradition of resistance, a history of fighting for their lands. I met Wyandottes and Delawares from Ohio, remnants of once powerful nations that had been reduced and scattered by American expansion, people who had lost almost everything, but who still had their pride, their dignity, their refusal to simply disappear. I met Miamis and Potawatomis from Indiana, who lived closest to the American settlements, who felt the pressure most acutely, who knew that if the Confederacy failed, they would be the first to be destroyed. The atmosphere in Prophetstown was electric, charged with hope and purpose and determination, and I felt privileged to be part of it, to be present at the birth of something new, something important, something that could change the world. We trained together, we hunted together, we held councils together. We listened to the prophet preach and to Tecumseh speak. And we prepared for the war that we all knew was coming, the war that would determine whether we would survive as a people or whether we would be destroyed, scattered, absorbed into the American nation and forgotten. Tecumseh continued his travels, going south to visit the Creek and Cherokee and Chickasaw and Choctaw nations, trying to bring them into the Confederacy, trying to create a truly continental alliance that would stretch from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, an alliance so large and so powerful that the Americans would have no choice but to negotiate, to recognize Indian rights to stop their expansion. I accompanied him on some of these journeys, and I saw firsthand the power of his oratory, the way he could walk into a hostile council, into a gathering of chiefs who were skeptical or opposed to his message, and within hours have them nodding in agreement, have them pledging their support, have them committing their warriors to the Confederacy. In the summer of 1811, we traveled to the Creek Nation in Alabama, a journey of more than 800 miles that took us through forests and across rivers and over mountains, through lands that were still largely Indian territory, lands that had not yet been overrun by white settlers, lands where the old ways still prevailed. The Creek Nation was large and powerful, with thousands of warriors, and if they joined the Confederacy, it would be a major victory. It would give us the strength and the numbers we needed to seriously challenge American expansion. If you believe their story deserves to be heard, take a moment to support our channel with a like and subscribe. It ensures these forgotten histories are never truly lost. We arrived at the Creek Council grounds in late summer, and there were hundreds of Creek warriors and chiefs gathered there, and the atmosphere was tense, divided, because some of the Creeks wanted to join the Confederacy while others opposed it, and there were deep divisions within the Creek Nation about how to respond to the American threat. Some Creeks, particularly the younger warriors and those who lived in the more remote areas, were sympathetic to Tecumseh's message. They had seen what was happening in the north. They understood that the same thing would happen to them if they did not resist. But other Creeks, particularly the older chiefs and those who lived closer to American settlements, those who had adopted some American ways, who wore American clothes and lived in American-style houses and sent their children to American schools, they believed that accommodation was the only realistic option, that resistance would only bring destruction, that the best hope for Creek survival was to cooperate with the Americans, to sign treaties, to cede some land in order to preserve the rest. Tecumseh spoke to the Creek Council for 3 days, delivering what may have been the greatest speech of his life, a speech that ranged over history and philosophy and strategy and morality, a speech that was by turns gentle and fierce, reasoned and passionate, a speech that left the Creek warriors trembling with emotion, ready to take up their weapons and march north to join the fight. I was there, I heard every word, and I will try to recreate what he said, though my words are poor compared to his, though I cannot capture the power of his voice, the intensity of his gaze, the force of his presence. He began by acknowledging the divisions within the Creek Nation, by recognizing that there were legitimate differences of opinion about how to respond to the American threat, and he said, "Brothers of the South, I have come a long way to speak to you, and I thank you for hearing me, for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts, to explain my vision, to ask for your support. I know that you are divided, that some of you believe we should fight while others believe we should accommodate, and I respect your right to make your own decisions, to choose your own path. But I ask you to listen to me, to consider what I have to say, to think about the future, about what kind of world you want your children and grandchildren to live in, and then to decide with full knowledge of the consequences which path you will take." He paused, letting his words sink in, and then he continued, his voice growing stronger, more urgent. "You have heard the stories of what is happening in the north, how the whites are taking our lands, how they are pushing us onto reservations, how they are destroying our way of life. You think that because you are far away, because you have signed treaties, because you have adopted some of the white man's ways, that you are safe, that this will not happen to you. But you are wrong. The whites will not stop until they have taken everything, until they have pushed us into the sea or into the grave, until there are no more Indians, no more tribes, no more nations, only a memory of what once was. They do not see us as human beings. They see us as obstacles, as problems to be solved, as inconveniences to be removed. And they will remove you, just as they are removing us, unless you stand with us, unless you fight with us, unless you join the Confederacy and help us draw a line that they cannot cross. He walked back and forth as he spoke, his movements graceful and powerful, like a panther pacing, and every eye was fixed on him, every ear strained to hear his words. I have seen the future, and in that future there are no Creeks, no Cherokees, no Chickasaws, no Choctaws, no Shawnees, no Delawares, no Miamis. There are only scattered remnants, broken people living on the edges of white society, begging for scraps, forgotten and despised. But that future is not inevitable, it is not written in stone, it can be changed, but only if we act now, only if we unite now, only if we fight now. The time for talking is over, the time for treaties is over, the time for accommodation is over, the time for action has come. He stopped pacing and stood still, and he looked around the council, making eye contact with individual chiefs and warriors. And he said, I know what you are thinking. You are thinking that the Americans are too strong, that they are too numerous, that they have better weapons, that we cannot win. And it is true that they are strong, that they are numerous, that they have good weapons. But we have something they do not have. We have the land. We know every hill and valley, every river and stream, every forest and prairie. We can move through this country like ghosts. We can strike and disappear. We can fight on our terms, on ground of our choosing. And we have something else they do not have. We have justice on our side. We have the righteousness of our cause. We are fighting for our homes, for our families, for our very existence, while they are fighting for greed, for land they do not need, for wealth they do not deserve. And we have one more thing. We have unity, or we can have it if you join us, if you add your strength to ours, if you make the Confederacy complete. His voice rose to a crescendo, and he raised both arms above his head, and he said, Will you join us? Will you stand with your brothers? Will you fight for your children and your grandchildren? Or will you sit here in your comfortable villages and wait for the storm to reach you? Wait until it is too late. Wait until you have no choice, no options, no hope. The decision is yours. I cannot make it for you, but I can tell you this. If you choose to stand aside, if you choose to remain neutral, if you choose to hope that the Americans will leave you alone, then you are choosing death. You are choosing destruction. You are choosing to betray your children and your grandchildren, to leave them a world where there is no place for Indians, no place for our languages and our cultures and our ways of life. But if you choose to join us, if you choose to fight, then you are choosing life. You are choosing hope. You are choosing to give your children a chance, a fighting chance to survive, to preserve what we are, to remain Indians, to remain free. The silence that followed was profound, absolute, and then one of the Creek war chiefs, a man named Red Eagle, stood up and he said, Tecumseh speaks the truth. I have seen what the Americans do. I have seen how they take and never give back. And I believe that we must fight, that we must join the Confederacy, that we must stand together, or we will fall separately. And then other warriors stood up, one after another, pledging their support, committing themselves to the cause. And I felt a surge of hope, a belief that maybe we could do this. Maybe we could build an alliance large enough and strong enough to stop the Americans. But not all the Creeks joined us. The nation remained divided, with some warriors following Red Eagle and others following chiefs who counseled accommodation, and this division would later lead to a civil war among the Creeks, a war that would weaken them and make them vulnerable to American attack. A war that would be called the Creek War or the Red Stick War, and that would result in the destruction of Creek power and the loss of most of their lands. But in that moment, in that council, Tecumseh's words had power, had the ability to move men, to change minds, to inspire action. And I was proud to be associated with him, proud to be part of his movement, proud to believe in his vision. We returned to the north in the fall of 1811, and we found that the situation had deteriorated in our absence. that tensions between the Confederacy and the Americans had reached a breaking point. William Henry Harrison, the governor of Indiana Territory, was a man who understood the threat that Tecumseh represented, who saw that a united Indian Confederacy could stop American expansion, could even potentially push the Americans back, could create an independent Indian state in the heart of the continent, and he was determined to prevent this from happening. Harrison was not a stupid man. He was intelligent and ambitious and ruthless, a veteran of the Indian Wars of the 1790s, a man who had fought at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, who had seen firsthand the effectiveness of Indian warriors, who respected their fighting abilities even as he worked to destroy them. He had been appointed governor of Indiana Territory in 1801, and he had spent the past decade systematically acquiring Indian lands through treaties, buying millions of acres for pennies an acre, taking advantage of chiefs who were desperate or corrupt or simply ignorant of what they were signing. He had acquired more than 3 million acres through the Treaty of Fort Wayne in 1809, a treaty that Tecumseh declared invalid, a treaty that he said was signed by chiefs who had no authority to sell land that belonged to all Indians, a treaty that became one of the major grievances that led to the war. The tension between Harrison and Tecumseh had been building for years, and in August of 1810, they met face to face at Vincennes, Harrison's capital, for a council that nearly erupted into violence. I was there standing behind Tecumseh, with a group of about 80 warriors, my hand on my tomahawk, ready to fight if necessary, and I watched as these two men, these two leaders, these two visions of the future confronted each other. The contrast between them was stark. Harrison, in his military uniform, sitting in a chair on the porch of his mansion, surrounded by soldiers with fixed bayonets, the symbol of American power and authority, and Tecumseh in his traditional dress, his body painted, his hair adorned with feathers, sitting on the ground surrounded by warriors, the symbol of Indian resistance and defiance. Harrison spoke first, defending his treaties, claiming that they were legal and binding, that the chiefs who had signed them had every right to do so, that the land now belonged to the United States, and that the Indians who lived on it must leave. His voice was formal, bureaucratic, the voice of a man who was used to being obeyed, who expected his authority to be recognized and accepted. He said, "Tecumseh, you have been traveling among the tribes, spreading lies and discontent, telling the Indians that the treaties I have negotiated are invalid, that the land still belongs to them, that they do not have to honor their agreements. But you are wrong. The treaties are legal. They were signed by the rightful chiefs of the tribes. They were witnessed by American officials. They were ratified by the government, and they are binding. The land has been purchased. It now belongs to the United States, and the Indians who live on it must move to the lands that have been reserved for them. This is the law, this is the reality, and you must accept it." Tecumseh listened, his face impassive, showing no emotion, and then he rose to speak, and his voice was like cold steel, hard and sharp and cutting. He said, "Governor Harrison, you speak of law, of treaties, of legal rights, but these are white man's concepts. These are not our ways, these are not our understandings. You say that the chiefs who signed your treaties had the right to sell the land, but I say they did not. The land belongs to all Indians. It was given to us by the Creator to share, and no one man, no one tribe, no one chief has the right to sell it. If one tribe can sell the land, then any tribe can sell any land, and soon there will be no land left, and we will all be homeless. We will all be wanderers. We will all be beggars in the land of our fathers." He paused, and I could see Harrison's face reddening, could see his jaw clenching, could see his anger building, but Tecumseh continued, his voice growing stronger, more forceful. "Your treaties are based on a lie, on the false premise that the land can be owned by individuals or tribes. But the land cannot be owned. It can only be used, it can only be cared for, it can only be shared. You whites have a different view. You believe that land is property, that it can be bought and sold like a horse or a blanket, but this is not our way, this has never been our way, and we do not accept it. I have traveled among many tribes, and I have spoken to many chiefs, and they agree with me. They support the Confederacy. They recognize that we must stand together, or we will fall separately. Your treaties are worthless, they are not binding, and we will not honor them. We will not leave the land. We will not move west. We will not surrender any more territory. This is our final position. This is the line we will not cross. And if you try to force us, if you send your soldiers against us, then we will fight. And we will fight to the death, because we have nothing left to lose, because you have already taken everything else. And we will not give you this. We will not give you our dignity. We will not give you our self-respect. We will not give you our right to exist as a people. Harrison stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden porch, and he pointed at Tecumseh and he said, "You are a liar. Your claims are false. The treaties are legal and they will be enforced, and if you resist, if you encourage the Indians to resist, then you will be destroyed. You and all who follow you will be hunted down and killed or driven from this territory, and your Confederacy will be crushed before it can become a threat." His voice was shaking with anger, and I could see the soldiers behind him tensing, raising their rifles slightly, preparing for action. Tecumseh stood up, and the two men faced each other across a distance of perhaps 20 feet, and the tension was unbearable. The air seemed to crackle with it, and I tightened my grip on my tomahawk, ready to fight, ready to die if necessary, and I saw the other warriors doing the same, saw them shifting their weight, preparing to charge, and I knew that if either man made a wrong move, if either man gave a signal, the killing would start, and it would be a bloodbath, and the war would begin right there, right then, in Harrison's front yard. But then Tecumseh turned and walked away, his movements deliberate and controlled, showing no fear, no haste, and his warriors followed him. And we walked out of Vincennes in silence, in dignity, and the moment passed. But the die was cast, the conflict was inevitable, and both men knew it. As we walked back to our camp, Tecumseh said to me and the other warriors, "Harrison is a dangerous man. He is intelligent and determined, and he will not stop until he has destroyed us or we have destroyed him. The time is coming when we will have to fight, when words will no longer be enough, when we will have to prove with our blood and our courage that we are serious, that we will not be pushed any further, that we will defend our lands and our rights with our lives if necessary. Prepare yourselves, my brothers. The war is coming and it will be terrible, and many of us will die. But we will die as men, as warriors, as Indians who refuse to surrender, who refuse to accept defeat, who refuse to allow our people to be destroyed without a fight." Tecumseh left Vincennes and resumed his travels, going south to speak to the Creeks and Cherokees, trying to bring them into the Confederacy before the war started, trying to build the alliance as large and as strong as possible. And he left his brother, the Prophet, in charge of Prophetstown, with strict instructions not to engage the Americans, not to give Harrison any excuse to attack, to wait until Tecumseh returned, to wait until the Confederacy was complete, to wait until the time was right. He said to the Prophet, "Brother, you must be patient. You must be wise. You must not allow yourself to be provoked. Harrison wants an excuse to attack us. He wants to destroy Prophetstown. He wants to crush the Confederacy before it becomes too strong. And if you give him that excuse, if you attack his soldiers or his settlements, then he will come with his army, and he will destroy everything we have built. Wait for me. Wait until I return from the south. Wait until the Creek and Cherokee warriors join us, and then we will be strong enough to fight. Then we will be ready to face the Americans. Then we will have a chance to win. But if you fight now, if you fight before we are ready, then we will lose, and everything will be lost." But the Prophet was not Tecumseh. He did not have his brother's wisdom or his patience or his strategic sense, and he allowed himself to be provoked, allowed himself to be maneuvered into a position where he felt he had no choice but to fight. In the fall of 1811, while Tecumseh was still in the south, Harrison marched on Prophetstown with an army of about 1,000 men, regular soldiers from the 4th U.S. Infantry Regiment, and militia volunteers from Indiana and Kentucky, and he camped near the village, on a rise of ground that would later be called Burnett's Creek, about a mile from Prophetstown, and he sent messages saying that he wanted to talk, that he wanted to negotiate. But everyone knew that this was a lie, that Harrison had come to destroy Prophetstown, to crush the Confederacy, before it could become a real threat, to kill or capture the Prophet and scatter his followers. The Prophet held a council with the war chiefs and the warriors, and the debate was intense, passionate, divided. Some argued that we should abandon the village, should melt away into the forest and avoid a battle we were not ready for, should wait for Tecumseh to return, should preserve our strength for a fight we could win. But others argued that this would be cowardly, that this would destroy the Confederacy's credibility, that if we ran now, no tribe would ever join us, no warrior would ever believe in us, that we would be seen as weak, as afraid, as unworthy of the support we had been seeking. They argued that we had to fight, that we had to show the Americans that we were serious, that we were not afraid, that we would defend our village and our rights, and that if we won, if we defeated Harrison's army, it would be a great victory. It would inspire other tribes to join us. It would prove that the Confederacy was strong, that we could stand against the Americans. The prophet, influenced by his own visions and his own pride and his own need to prove himself as a leader in his brother's absence, decided to attack, decided to strike first, decided to hit Harrison's camp at night and drive the Americans away before they could attack us. He claimed that he had received a vision from the Master of Life, that the Creator had told him that the American bullets would not harm us, that we would be protected by spiritual power, that we would win a great victory. He performed ceremonies, he sang sacred songs, he distributed medicine bundles to the warriors, and he told them that if they believed, if they had faith, if they followed his instructions, they would be invincible. They would sweep the Americans away like leaves before a storm. It was a disastrous decision, a decision that would doom the Confederacy, that would lead to Tecumseh's death and the destruction of everything he had worked for. But we did not know that then. We believed in the prophet's visions. We believed that the Creator would protect us. We believed that we could win. I was skeptical. I had doubts. I remembered Tecumseh's instructions to wait, to be patient, to avoid a premature battle. But I was also young and eager to prove myself, eager to fight, eager to strike back at the enemy. And I allowed myself to be swept up in the excitement, in the fervor, in the belief that maybe the prophet was right. Maybe we could win. Maybe this was the moment we had been waiting for. The attack came just before dawn on November 7th, 1811. And I was part of it. I was one of about 500 warriors who crept through the darkness toward Harrison's camp, who waited in the cold and the damp for the signal, who charged forward with a war cry when the prophet gave the word. We hit them hard. We caught them by surprise. We killed many of them in the first few minutes, soldiers who were still in their blankets, who had not had time to grab their weapons, who died before they fully understood what was happening. I shot a soldier who was stumbling out of his tent, my rifle ball hitting him in the chest, and he fell backward and did not move, and I reloaded and fired again, and I saw another man fall, and for a moment, for a brief shining moment, it seemed that we would win, that we would overrun the camp, that we would kill Harrison and his officers and send the survivors fleeing back to their settlements. But Harrison was a veteran, a professional soldier who had fought Indians before, who knew their tactics, who had prepared for this possibility, and he rallied his men. He organized a defense. He brought up his artillery, and the tide turned. The soldiers formed into lines. They fired volleys into our ranks. They used their bayonets when we got close, and the cannons, the terrible cannons that fired grape shot, iron balls that spread out like a deadly rain, cutting down multiple warriors with each shot. Those cannons were the deciding factor. They created gaps in our lines. They broke our charges. They forced us back. The battle raged for 2 hours, hand-to-hand fighting in the pre-dawn darkness, men grappling and stabbing and shooting at point-blank range, the air filled with smoke and screams, and the smell of blood and gunpowder. And gradually, slowly, we were pushed back. We were driven away from the camp. We were forced to retreat. The prophet's promises proved false. The bullets did harm us. The spiritual protection did not materialize, and warriors fell all around me. Good men, brave men, men who believed in Tecumseh's vision and who died trying to defend it. I saw Wawiasika, a Kickapoo warrior who had become my friend, take a musket ball in the throat, and he fell to his knees, clutching at the wound, blood pouring between his fingers, and he looked at me with eyes full of surprise and fear. And then he fell forward and died, and I could not stop to help him, could not stop to mourn him, could only keep fighting, keep moving, keep trying to survive. I saw Shawnee, a Potawatomi chief, fighting with desperate courage, his war club rising and falling, smashing skulls, breaking bones, but even his courage was not enough. Even his strength could not turn the tide, and he was forced to retreat with the rest of us. When the sun rose and we counted our dead, we realized that we had been defeated, that the prophet's visions had been false, that the Creator had not protected us, that we had been beaten by the Americans. We lost between 30 and 40 warriors killed, with many more wounded, and the Americans lost about 60 killed and over 100 wounded. So in terms of casualties, it was roughly even, but strategically, it was a disaster for us. Because we had failed to drive the Americans away, we had failed to destroy their army, and we had given Harrison the excuse he needed to destroy Prophetstown. Harrison's men advanced on the village the next day, and we had already abandoned it, had taken what we could carry and fled, scattering into the forest, and the soldiers burned Prophetstown. Destroyed our lodges and our supplies and our food stores, burned the corn that we had stored for winter, destroyed everything we had built. The Confederacy, which had seemed so strong, so promising, so full of hope, was shattered, was broken, was reduced to a remnant, and the warriors who had gathered at Prophetstown from many tribes returned to their own villages, disillusioned, defeated, no longer believing in the prophet's visions, no longer trusting his leadership. When Tecumseh returned from the south in January of 1812 and learned what had happened, he was furious, he was devastated, he was heartbroken. He confronted his brother in front of the assembled warriors, and his anger was terrible to behold, his voice like thunder, his eyes blazing with rage and disappointment. He said, "Brother, you have destroyed everything. You have ruined years of work. You have thrown away the best chance the Indians have ever had to unite and resist. I told you to wait. I told you to be patient. I told you not to give Harrison an excuse to attack, and you disobeyed me. You allowed your pride and your visions to cloud your judgment. And now look at what has happened. Prophetstown is destroyed. Our warriors are scattered. Our allies have lost faith in us, and the Americans are stronger than ever." Some say that Tecumseh struck his brother, that he grabbed him by the throat and threw him to the ground, that he threatened to kill him, and whether or not this is true, I do not know. I was not close enough to see exactly what happened, but I know that the prophet was humiliated, that he lost much of his influence after Tippecanoe, that he was no longer seen as a great spiritual leader, but as a false prophet whose visions had led to disaster. But Tecumseh did not give up. He did not abandon his dream. He tried to rebuild the Confederacy, tried to rally the tribes, tried to convince them that Tippecanoe had been a setback, but not a defeat, that they could still win if they stood together. It was harder now, much harder, because the defeat had damaged his credibility, had made the tribes more cautious, more skeptical, more reluctant to commit their warriors to a cause that seemed increasingly hopeless. But Tecumseh persevered. He continued to travel, continued to speak, continued to build alliances, and he found a new opportunity when the War of 1812 began, the war between the United States and Great Britain. The causes of the War of 1812 were complex, involving British interference with American shipping, the impressment of American sailors into the British Navy, and American desires to expand into British Canada and Spanish Florida. But for Tecumseh, the war represented an opportunity, a chance to ally with the British, to use their resources and their military power to fight the Americans, to reclaim the lost lands, to achieve through alliance what he had not been able to achieve through the Confederacy alone. He traveled to Canada in the spring of 1812 and met with British officers at Fort Malden, and he offered them an alliance, offered them the support of the Indian Confederacy in exchange for British support for Indian rights, for Indian lands, for the creation of an independent Indian state in the Northwest Territory, a buffer state between the United States and British Canada that would be governed by Indians, that would preserve Indian lands and Indian ways of life, that would be recognized by both the British and the Americans as a sovereign nation. The British agreed they needed Indian allies. They needed warriors who knew the land and who could fight the Americans in the forests and the swamps where British regulars were at a disadvantage, and they promised Tecumseh that if the British won the war, they would support the creation of an Indian state, would use their diplomatic influence to force the Americans to recognize it, would provide military support to defend it. Tecumseh believed these promises, or at least he wanted to believe them, because they represented the last best hope for his people, the last chance to preserve something of the old ways, to create a place where Indians could live according to their own customs and traditions, free from American control. Tecumseh became a brigadier general in the British Army, a rank that recognized his leadership, his abilities, his importance to the war effort, and he was given command of all the Indian forces fighting alongside the British. I fought with Tecumseh in that war. I was at the siege of Fort Detroit in August of 1812, where we helped the British capture the fort and the American army that defended it, a stunning victory that gave us hope, that made us believe that maybe, just maybe, we could win, that maybe the British would keep their promises, that maybe we would get our lands back. The capture of Detroit was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Tecumseh and the British commander, General Isaac Brock, worked together to convince the American commander, General William Hull, that he was facing a much larger force than he actually was, that he was surrounded, that his position was hopeless, and that if he did not surrender, his entire army would be massacred by the Indians. Tecumseh had his warriors march through a clearing in full view of the fort, and then circle back through the forest and march through again and again, creating the illusion that there were thousands of warriors, when in fact there were only about 600. The deception worked. Hull surrendered without a fight, and we captured the fort and over 2,000 American soldiers, and it was a great victory, the greatest victory of the war for the British and their Indian allies. I was at the Battle of Frenchtown in January of 1813, also called the River Raisin Massacre, a battle that we won but that was marred by atrocities committed against American prisoners, atrocities that Tecumseh tried to prevent but could not because he was not present when they occurred, and because some of the warriors were so filled with rage, so consumed by hatred for the Americans who had killed their families and burned their villages, that they could not be controlled. The massacre at Frenchtown became a rallying cry for the Americans. Remember the Raisin became their battle cry, and it hardened American resolve, made them more determined to destroy us, made them less likely to show mercy when they had the upper hand. I was at the siege of Fort Meigs in April and May of 1813, where we fought the Americans to a standstill, where we inflicted heavy casualties, where we proved that we were a force to be reckoned with, but where we also failed to capture the fort, failed to achieve a decisive victory, failed to break American power in the Northwest. The siege lasted for several days, and we attacked repeatedly, trying to overwhelm the defenders. But the fort was well built and well defended, and the Americans had artillery, and they fought with determination, and we could not break through. And then the tide of the war turned against us. The Americans won control of Lake Erie in September of 1813, defeating the British fleet in a naval battle. And this was a disaster for the British and for us, because it meant that the British could no longer supply their forces in the Northwest, could no longer bring in reinforcements or ammunition or food, and it meant that the Americans could move troops and supplies by water, could reinforce their positions, could go on the offensive. The British commander, General Henry Proctor, who had replaced Brock after Brock was killed at the Battle of Queenston Heights, decided to retreat, to abandon the Northwest, to fall back into Canada, and Tecumseh was furious. He argued that we should stay and fight, that we should defend the land, that retreating would destroy Indian morale, would make the tribes lose faith in the British, would doom the Confederacy. But Proctor would not listen, he was afraid. He was more concerned with saving his own army than with keeping his promises to the Indians, and he ordered a retreat, and Tecumseh had no choice but to follow, because without British support, without British supplies and ammunition, we could not fight the Americans alone. We retreated through the wilderness, pursued by an American army under General William Henry Harrison, the same Harrison who had defeated us at Tippecanoe, the same Harrison who had burned Prophetstown, the same Harrison who was now determined to finish what he had started, to destroy Tecumseh and the Confederacy once and for all. We made our stand on October 5th, 1813, at a place near the Thames River in Ontario, Canada, in a forest where we hoped the terrain would give us an advantage, where we hoped we could ambush the Americans, where we hoped we could inflict enough casualties to force them to stop their pursuit. Tecumseh knew that the British were abandoning us, that Proctor was more interested in saving himself than in fighting, and he was angry, he was bitter, but he was also determined to fight, to make the Americans pay a price, to die if necessary, but to die fighting, to die as a warrior. Before the battle, Tecumseh spoke to the assembled warriors, and his words were somber, reflective, filled with a sense of finality, as if he knew that this would be his last battle, his last speech, his last chance to inspire his followers. He said, "Brothers, we have fought together for many years. We have won victories and we have suffered defeats. We have seen our friends die and our villages burned. We have endured hardships and privations, but we have never surrendered. We have never given up. We have never stopped believing that we could preserve our lands and our way of life. Today we face the Americans again, and I do not know if we will win or lose. I do not know if we will survive or die, but I know that we will fight with courage and honor, that we will show the Americans that we are warriors, that we are men, that we will not go quietly into the darkness. The British are retreating. They are abandoning us. They are breaking their promises. But we will not retreat. We will not run. We will stand here and we will fight. And if we die, we will die on our feet, with weapons in our hands, defending the land of our fathers." He paused and he looked around at the warriors and he said, "I have had a vision. I have seen my death. I know that I will not survive this day, and I am at peace with that. I am ready to join my ancestors, to cross over to the spirit world. But I ask you, my brothers, do not let my death be in vain. Do not let the Confederacy die with me. Continue the fight. Continue to resist. Continue to work for the unity of our people, because that is the only way we will survive. That is the only way we will preserve something of what we are, of what we have been." And then he removed his British general's uniform, the red coat and the medals and the insignia of rank, and he put on his traditional Shawnee clothing, his buckskin leggings and his breechcloth and his beaded shirt. And he said, "I will die as I have lived, as a Shawnee, as an Indian, as a free man, and I will meet my Creator dressed in the clothes of my people, not in the uniform of the British who have betrayed us." The battle began in the early afternoon, the Americans advancing through the forest, their cavalry in the lead, and we were positioned behind trees and fallen logs, waiting for them to come within range. The British regulars, what few remained, were positioned to our right, but they broke almost immediately when the American cavalry charged. They fired one volley and then they ran. They fled into the forest, abandoning us, leaving us to face the Americans alone. But we did not run. We held our ground. We fired into the charging cavalry. We brought down horses and riders, and for a few minutes, we stopped them. We drove them back. But then they regrouped and charged again, and this time they broke through our line and the fighting became hand-to-hand, close and brutal and desperate. I was fighting near Tecumseh. I saw him moving through the battle, encouraging the warriors, directing the defense, fighting with a rifle and a tomahawk. And he was magnificent. He was everything a warrior should be, brave and strong and defiant, refusing to yield, refusing to run, refusing to accept defeat. He was in the thick of the fighting, always where the danger was greatest, always where his presence was most needed. And the warriors fought harder because he was there, because they wanted to prove themselves worthy of him, because they did not want to fail him. And then I saw him fall, saw him take a bullet, saw him stagger and drop to his knees, and I tried to reach him, tried to get to him, but there were too many soldiers between us, too much chaos, too much smoke and noise and confusion. And by the time I fought my way to where he had fallen, he was gone, his body was gone, taken by warriors who wanted to prevent the enemy from mutilating it, or taken by the Americans as a trophy. I do not know, I never found out, and to this day, no one knows where Tecumseh is buried, where his bones rest, where his spirit departed this world. With Tecumseh's death, the will to fight left us. The warriors began to retreat, to melt away into the forest, and the battle was over and we had lost, and everything was lost. The Confederacy collapsed, the alliance fell apart, the tribes made separate pieces with the Americans, and the dream of a united Indian nation died. The War of 1812 ended with the Treaty of Ghent in December of 1814, which restored the pre-war boundaries between the United States and British Canada, but said nothing about Indian rights, nothing about Indian lands, nothing about the promises the British had made to us, nothing about the independent Indian state that Tecumseh had fought for. We were abandoned, we were betrayed, we were left to face the Americans alone, and the Americans were not merciful. They were not forgiving. They were vengeful and determined to punish us for having fought against them. In the years that followed, the Shawnee and the other tribes of the Northwest were forced onto reservations, were forced to cede their lands, were forced to move west of the Mississippi, were scattered and broken and reduced to poverty and dependence. The great Confederacy that Tecumseh had built, the alliance that had united 10 tribes, that had brought together thousands of warriors, that had represented the best hope for Indian survival, was gone, was forgotten, was reduced to a story, a memory, a might have been. I survived the war, I survived the Battle of the Thames, and I have lived long enough to see the complete destruction of the world I knew, the world that Tecumseh tried to save. I am an old man now, 83 winters, my hair white, my body bent, my eyes dim, and I live on a reservation in Kansas, far from the Ohio country where I was born, far from the forests and rivers and villages of my youth, and I am surrounded by the wreckage of my people, by the alcoholism and the poverty and the despair that have replaced the pride and the dignity and the hope that we once had. I think often of Tecumseh, of his vision, of his courage, of his eloquence, of his unwavering commitment to his people, and I wonder what would have happened if the prophet had not attacked at Tippecanoe, if the Confederacy had been given more time to grow, if more tribes had joined, if the British had kept their promises, if Tecumseh had not been killed at the Thames. Would we have won? Could we have stopped the American expansion? Could we have created an independent Indian state, a nation that would have survived and thrived and preserved our cultures and our languages and our ways of life? I do not know. I will never know, but I believe that we had a chance, that for a brief moment in history, we had a real chance to change our fate, to determine our own future, to survive as a people. And that chance was embodied in one man, in Tecumseh, in his vision and his leadership and his ability to unite people who had never been united before. He was not perfect. He made mistakes. He trusted his brother when he should not have. He allied with the British when they were not trustworthy. He believed that words and vision could overcome the material advantages of the Americans, their numbers and their weapons, and their relentless hunger for land. But he tried, he fought, he gave everything he had, and he inspired thousands of people to believe in something larger than themselves, to believe in the possibility of unity, to believe in the possibility of resistance, to believe in the possibility of survival. The story of Tecumseh and his Confederacy is a story of what might have been, a story of a dream that came close to realization, but ultimately failed, a story of a leader who saw what needed to be done and who tried with every fiber of his being to do it, and who died in the attempt. Tecumseh once said, "A single twig breaks, but the bundle of twigs is strong." And this was the essence of his message, the core of his vision, the foundation of his Confederacy. He understood that divided we would fall, that united we might stand, and he spent his life trying to create that unity, trying to build that bundle of twigs, trying to make us strong enough to resist the storm that was coming. He failed, but his failure was not for lack of trying, not for lack of courage, not for lack of vision. He failed because the forces arrayed against him were too strong, because the American hunger for land was too great, because the British support was too unreliable, because the divisions among the tribes were too deep, because history and circumstance and bad luck conspired against him. But his vision lives on, his words live on, his example lives on, and in every generation, there are those who remember him, who honor him, who try to carry forward his message of unity and resistance and survival. I am one of those people. I am a keeper of his memory. I am a witness to what he tried to do, and I am telling this story now, in my old age, so that it will not be forgotten, so that future generations will know that there was a time when the Indians stood together, when they fought together, when they believed that they could determine their own fate, and that this time was made possible by one man, by Tecumseh, by the greatest leader our people have ever known. Today, there are monuments to Tecumseh. There are towns and counties and schools named after him. There are books and poems and plays written about him, and the Americans who once fought against him now honor him as a great man, as a worthy opponent, as a tragic hero. But these monuments and these honors are cold comfort. They are tokens. They are the ways that the victors salve their consciences, the ways they acknowledge the humanity of those they destroyed, while still keeping the fruits of that destruction. Tecumseh did not want monuments. He wanted justice. He wanted his people to survive. He wanted the land to remain in Indian hands. He wanted the cultures and the languages and the ways of life to continue, and none of that happened. All of that was lost, and no amount of monuments or honors or historical recognition can change that fact. I will die soon. I am old and tired and sick. And when I die, there will be one less person who knew Tecumseh, one less person who heard him speak, one less person who fought beside him, one less person who believed in his vision. But his story will continue. It will be passed down through the generations. It will be told and retold, and as long as it is told, as long as it is remembered, then Tecumseh is not truly dead. His vision is not truly lost. His dream is not truly over. The fight for Indian rights, for Indian lands, for Indian survival continues to this day, in different forms, in different ways, but it continues, and it is inspired by leaders like Tecumseh, by visionaries who saw what needed to be done, and who tried to do it, who refused to accept defeat, who refused to surrender, who refused to allow their people to be erased from history. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever. But the fight is not over. It continues in the courts and the legislatures and the schools and the communities. It continues in the struggle to preserve our languages and our cultures and our identities. It continues in the refusal to forget, the refusal to be silent, the refusal to accept that what was done to us was right or just or inevitable. Tecumseh's Confederacy failed, but his vision of unity, his call for Indians to stand together, his understanding that our survival depends on our ability to overcome our divisions and work together, that vision is as relevant today as it was in 1811, and it will remain relevant as long as there are Indian people, as long as there are tribes, as long as there are those who remember who they are and where they came from and what was taken from them. This was the story of Peshawar Wildcat of the Shawnee, a warrior who followed Tecumseh, who believed in his vision, who fought for his Confederacy, and who lived to see it fail, but who never stopped believing that it was the right thing to do, that it was worth fighting for, that it represented the best hope for Indian survival. These are the histories that are not written in the school books. If you are moved by this testament and believe these voices must be heard, please take a moment to honor their legacy. Like this video to help it reach others, subscribe to Tribal Lore to ensure you don't miss another chapter of our shared past, and most importantly, leave a comment below. Tell us what part of this story resonated with you, or suggest a piece of history you believe we should uncover next. Your engagement is the fire that keeps these stories alive. Thank you for listening.